Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I came back to the mountains for peace. Instead, I found a padlock on my gate, strangers in my cabin, and a smug HOA trying to erase me from my own land. They thought I'd go quietly. They were wrong. This wasn't a property dispute, it was war, and I came ready to fight. The last thing I expected to find on my quiet return to the mountains was a padlock on my own damn gate. I had just spent 4 hours winding through the switchbacks of Highway 58, windows down, radio off, letting the pine-scented air and jagged ridgelines wash the noise of city life out of my brain. This cabin, my father's cabin, now mine, had always been my reset button, a place without HOA newsletters, espresso machines, or people who use impactful unironically in meetings. I wasn't here to host yoga retreats or install smart thermostats. I was here to be alone, sketch ugly concept buildings, and make grilled cheese over an open fire like a feral middle-aged widower. And yet, as I turned off the gravel road and rolled up to my private driveway, I felt the gut punch of bureaucratic idiocy before I even brought the truck to a full stop. The gate had a new chain and lock, thick, shiny, aggressive. A plastic sign hung crookedly from the metal, property seized, Aspen Summit HOA, printed in all caps with the kind of corporate smugness only an HOA can muster. Below that, zip-tied to the fence post, was a laminated notice that might as well have said, "Screw you, Graham." It read, "This structure has been deemed abandoned per HOA Code Section 11B. Due to prolonged vacancy and potential code violations, property control has been assumed by Aspen Summit Homeowners Association pending review. Any attempts to enter will be considered trespassing." I sat in the cab for a moment, stunned, then slowly got out, heart already pounding. My truck boots crunched the frost-bitten dirt. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it, except for the car parked in the clearing near the cabin, a silver crossover SUV I didn't recognize. On the porch sat a pair of blue women's running shoes and a plastic crate full of what looked like groceries. Someone was in my house. I stared for a beat too long, fists clenched, trying to process the violation. I hadn't been up here in about 3 months, sure, but that didn't mean the place was abandoned. I'd paid the taxes. I'd replaced the septic pump last year. I had security lighting rigged up, and the cabin was fully furnished, stocked, and insured. It wasn't just a building. It was the last thing I had left of my father, and someone had decided it was fair game because I didn't keep a lawn chair on the porch year-round. I rattled the gate once. Solid. No way around without hiking a half-mile through brush. I opened my glove box, pulled out the folder with my property deed and tax receipts, and called the sheriff's non-emergency line. When the deputy arrived, he was a man in his late 30s with aviators and the relaxed gait of someone who'd seen too many HOA disputes to care anymore. He listened politely as I explained the situation, flipping through my documents. "Mr. Browning," he said, "I believe you, but there's a filing from the Aspen Summit HOA that claims this property was left uninhabited for an extended period. They petitioned the county 2 weeks ago to designate it as abandoned. A temporary injunction's been issued by a local judge while they verify ownership and code compliance." I nearly dropped my papers. "They filed this without even contacting me?" He shrugged. "Says here they sent notice to your last listed address. Might have been intercepted or misfiled. I live in Denver. My address hasn't changed in 6 years. He didn't argue, just glanced up at the cabin where the porch light flicked on automatically in the fading afternoon. "Listen, I can't authorize you to enter right now. Technically, this is an active property dispute until it's sorted in court. Someone's inside." He nodded. "I'll log that. But unless you can prove they broke in or present immediate danger, there's not much else I can do today." I stood there as his cruiser pulled away, dust rising in its wake, and stared at the cabin as the sun started to dip below the ridge. My house, my land, my rules. Or so I thought. Now someone was sipping wine on my porch while my name was being dragged through HOA red tape without my knowledge. I drove back to the nearest town, Marble Ridge, checking into a roadside inn that smelled like mildew and overcooked pot roast. I sat on the edge of the bed with the deed still in my hand, rereading the boundary descriptions and tax stamps like I was afraid they'd disappear. The idea that a neighborhood committee I had never agreed to join had the power to not only block me from my own home, but install strangers inside it, that wasn't just maddening. It was war. I woke up the next morning with my jaw clenched so tight I thought I'd cracked a molar. The cheap motel mattress had done nothing to soften the anger simmering under my skin. I'd barely slept, my mind looping through the same useless questions. How the hell can a group I never joined take my house? Who the hell is in there? Until finally, as the sun cracked over the jagged peaks, I got in the truck and drove straight to the Aspen Summit HOA office. It was housed in a beige, fake rustic building at the base of the valley, wedged between a real estate firm and a wellness spa that sold chakra teas. I walked in, still wearing my flannel from the night before, and approached the front desk with the energy of a man 2 minutes away from choking someone with a clipboard. The receptionist looked up with a practiced smile that died about halfway through my name. "Ah, Mr. Browning. Yes, I believe Ms. Woolbridge is expecting you." I hadn't called ahead. She led me into a side office with an overly large desk and the personality of a dental insurance brochure. Behind it sat Karen Woolbridge, president of the Aspen Summit Homeowners Association, queen of pre-printed authority, and, judging by the way she looked at me, a woman who hadn't been told no since the Carter administration. She rose, extended a hand, and smiled like a rattlesnake in pearls. "Mr. Browning, I'm so glad you came in. This will be easier, face to face." I didn't shake her hand. "You're occupying my property." She didn't flinch. "Your structure was reported as abandoned under our oversight protocols. Section 11B of our bylaws allows the HOA to assume stewardship over any property deemed vacant and degrading to community standards. I don't belong to your HOA. That's currently under review. You see, the parcels surrounding yours were incorporated into Aspen Summit's expansion 3 years ago. Your lot was included in the updated map filed with the county, though it seems your deed may predate the formal jurisdiction." "May?" I leaned forward. "I inherited that cabin. My father built it in the 70s. We've never been under HOA authority. Your map doesn't mean jack." Karen sat down again as if my anger bored her. "Well, unfortunately, these matters can be rather murky, especially when absentee owners neglect properties for extended periods. Community stability is fragile, Mr. Browning. Vacant lots attract fire risk, pests, loiterers. We have a duty to protect our members." "I'm not your member." "That's not entirely clear," she said, sliding a glossy brochure across the desk. "But we're open to resolving this without litigation. If you'd like to formalize your HOA membership, we could discuss options. One possibility, selling the cabin to the association, perhaps. We have parties interested. It would ensure your investment wasn't wasted in legal fees." My fingers twitched. "Did you just threaten to bankrupt me?" Karen smiled again. "I'm offering you a path forward. Clean, simple, mutual." I stood. "I'll see you in court." Before she could respond, I was out the door. By the time I returned to my truck, I already had 2 new notifications on my phone. One was a formal notice from the Marble Ridge Fire Safety Board, citing me for failure to clear brush and creating a combustible hazard. The other was a violation report claiming an illegal extension had been built on my cabin without proper permits. I hadn't even touched the structure in over a year. I stared at the screen, feeling the layers of attack starting to stack like a slow-motion avalanche. This wasn't some HOA clerical error. It was coordinated, a campaign. I had refused to kiss the ring, so now they were going to drown me in paperwork and fines until I either broke or gave in. Back at the motel, I spread out the notices on the tiny desk next to my tax records, photos of the property, and the deed in my father's name. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't overreacting. These bastards were trying to steal my land, and they were doing it by the book. My hands were already dialing a lawyer before I finished the thought. It was just after midnight when I parked the truck half a mile from the cabin and killed the lights. No headlights, no engine noise, no movement. Just the black stillness of the Colorado woods and the faint hiss of wind through the lodge poles. I'd spent the last 6 hours driving loops around town, dodging stress calls from the lawyer and debating whether I was actually about to trespass on my own damn property. Then I remembered that Karen Woolbridge had already declared me a criminal, so what difference would it make? I loaded my gear, a thermal drone, a small trail cam, a flashlight with a red lens, and a folding knife I didn't intend to use but kept in my pocket anyway. The hike in was slow and deliberate. I stuck to the deer trail that ran parallel to the ridgeline, then dropped down into the back slope behind the cabin. The ground was still partially frozen, and every snapped twig sounded like a firecracker in the quiet. When I finally got eyes on the cabin, I froze undercover. Lights were on. Not just a single lamp or a porch light someone forgot to turn off. Every room was lit up like a rental ski lodge. Through the trees, I could see motion inside. A man. Stocky, mid-30s maybe, wearing cargo pants and a t-shirt, beer bottle in hand, pacing lazily through my living room, like he was waiting for a pizza to arrive. My leather reading chair had been moved. My coffee table, hand-built by my father, was gone entirely, replaced by some particle board IKEA crime against furniture. Through the open window, I caught a glimpse of new curtains. Floral. I watched for several minutes, heart pounding in a sick, hollow rhythm. Eventually, the man opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. He leaned against the rail, cracked his neck, and took a drag off a vape. Then he turned and called inside, "Babe, you want the rest of the wine, or should I finish it?" I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just memorized every detail, his voice, his posture, the way he rubbed his temple like a man who'd had too many expensive weekends and not enough consequences. Then I waited until they'd gone to bed. An hour later, I crept down the slope and approached the rear of the property. I had installed a crawl space entrance years ago for plumbing repairs, hidden under the deck, latched but never locked. It was still there. I slid in quietly, belly scraping the dirt, and left a trail cam tucked just behind the skirting. I mounted a second one on a pine tree, angled toward the driveway. Everything was motion triggered and infrared. If someone stepped foot on my land again, I'd have eyes on it. But I wanted more, so I waited until dawn, then knocked on my own front door. The man who answered looked half awake and mostly annoyed. "Yeah?" I smiled like a traveling insurance adjuster and pulled out a notepad. "Good morning, sir. I'm with Alpine County Code Compliance, doing a routine follow-up on reported structures. Mind if I ask how long you've been renting this property?" He blinked, then stepped out onto the porch, shutting the door behind him. "About a month. Got a 6-month lease from the HOA. Pretty sweet deal, honestly. My girl's always wanted a mountain place." I scratched something fake on the notepad. "Do you happen to have a copy of the lease?" "Just for records." He shrugged and fetched a manila envelope from inside. I scanned the document without touching it. Standard lease, badly formatted, signed by Graham Browning, in a handwriting that looked like it had been traced from memory by a drunk raccoon. Notarized, too, by some office in Glenwood Springs I'd never heard of. "Looks good." I lied. "Mind if I take a picture?" He didn't hesitate. I snapped the shot, thanked him, and walked away as calmly as I could without breaking into a run. Back at the motel, I enlarged the photo on my laptop screen and studied every pixel. My name was there, my full name, middle initial and all, but the signature was about as accurate as a dollar store tattoo. The notary stamp was real, but that didn't mean much. For the right price, someone will notarize a dead man's will in blood. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened the old Google Drive folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were scanned copies of every sketch I'd ever done of the cabin. Floor plans, renovation receipts, even inventory lists from when I last updated the interior. All of it time-stamped, geotagged, signed. If they thought they could forge me out of existence, they were going to learn the hard way what happens when an architect goes to war. By noon the next day, I was sitting across from Tom Navarro, a former Denver PD detective who now worked freelance in Marble Ridge. Thick mustache, button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and the quiet, slow intensity of a man who'd buried more than one case in court filings. He didn't say much when I showed him the fake lease. He just nodded, leaned back, and said, "This stinks like old meat." I had already compiled a folder for him, timestamps of property tax payments, scanned receipts for every home improvement, photos from my last visit showing the cabin in perfect condition, and, most damning, the trail cam footage from last night. He skimmed it all like a man flipping through a death certificate, then asked a single question. "You ever deny any formal HOA request to buy or annex your property?" "Never got one," I said. "Not officially." He gave me a look. "Then they knew you'd say no." That afternoon, Tom and I paid a visit to the Marble Ridge County Clerk's office. We pulled property records for every lot adjoining mine, 26 parcels. 12 had been listed under independent ownership until the past 2 years. One by one, they'd been folded into the HOA registry, often following prolonged vacancies or owner relocations. Same paperwork format, same legal firm, same notarizations. Then we found something worse. One of the files belonged to James and Laurel McKinley, a couple in their 70s who owned a second home just north of mine. According to the records, their property had been formally incorporated into Aspen Summit HOA jurisdiction 6 months ago due to sustained abandonment, the exact language used in my case. Problem was, Tom recognized the name. He knew them, and he knew they hadn't abandoned Jack. We drove straight to their main residence on the outskirts of Marble Ridge. James met us at the door, a wiry man with tired eyes and a tremor in his hands that never fully stopped. Laurel came to join us in the kitchen with 2 cups of lukewarm tea she clearly didn't expect us to drink. When I told them about my cabin being occupied, Laurel went pale. James didn't look surprised. "They took ours too," he said, voice thin. "We went to California to help our daughter after she had her baby. Stayed there 5 months. When we came back, the locks were changed, and someone else was living in our house." "You called the police?" Tom asked. "They said the HOA had filed for control. Said we were in violation of code. We fought it for a while, but Laurel has been sick. We don't have the money or the time." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Who signed your house over?" James went to the back room and returned with a copy of the filing. Same format, same signature, same damn notary stamp from Glenwood Springs. Tom looked at me and said, "We've got a pattern. Back in town, we hit the local title office and pulled any public HOA filings under Aspen Summit's name. They'd submitted 8 formal assumption requests in the past 2 years, all citing properties as abandoned, all routed through the same law firm. Duval and Kirkwood, LLP, based in Boulder. Sounded respectable. Smelled like sewage." Tom started connecting dots. He called in a favor from a friend still in the DA's office and handed over the documents. Meanwhile, I returned to my lawyer, Rachel Armand, a private property specialist with a mind like a buzzsaw, and dumped everything on her desk. Her eyes lit up halfway through the folder. "Oh, they're screwed. You think we've got a case?" She laughed. "We've got a RICO starter kit." That night, while Tom kept digging into HOA finances and Rachel prepared for an emergency injunction hearing, I drove back out toward the cabin. I didn't go near the property this time. I just parked on the overlook and sat in silence for a long while, staring at the ridgeline beyond the trees. Somewhere in that glowing valley, a man was sleeping in my bed, under my roof, drinking wine bought with stolen access. And behind it all, Karen, smug and careful, playing queen of a kingdom built on fear, paperwork, and intimidation. But not for much longer. 3 days later, I sat stiffly in the back of the courtroom while my lawyer, Rachel, unleashed hell with a smile on her face. It was an emergency injunction hearing, held in the modest wood-paneled chambers of Judge Ronald Fitch, retired Army, late 60s, 0 patience for bull. Karen was there too, seated beside a pair of stiff-suited attorneys from Duval and Kirkwood, acting like the HOA was the second coming of FEMA. Her blazer was pristine, her posture screamed victory lap, but her eyes flicked toward me with just enough hesitation to betray the truth. She knew I wasn't bluffing anymore. Rachel laid it out with surgical precision. Exhibits A through G were property tax receipts, dated photographs, and maintenance logs. H through L were the trail cam footage showing the unauthorized tenant entering and exiting, copies of the fraudulent lease, and a notarization stamp we'd confirmed as part of a Glenwood Springs notary ring already under investigation. Exhibit M? That was the cherry on top, sworn statements from the McKinleys and 2 other homeowners who'd suffered the same assumed control process, their names scrubbed off county maps until they no longer existed, on paper anyway. Karen's lawyers tried to stall. They argued process, precedent, definitions of abandoned. They leaned into the bylaw language like it was constitutional scripture, but Judge Fitch was having none of it. "Let me get this straight," he said, one eyebrow raised. "You're arguing that a person who pays taxes, maintains the structure, and has never agreed to join your association can still have their house taken because it makes your community look untidy." One of the lawyers cleared his throat and said, "Something about visual continuity." The judge leaned forward. "And who the hell gave you the authority to determine that continuity outweighs ownership?" Karen shifted in her seat. Her jaw was set so tight I thought her veneers might crack. The injunction was granted. The court ordered an immediate halt to all HOA activity related to my property. Access to the house was to be restored to me within 48 hours. The tenant was to vacate the premises, pending further legal review. And Best of all, the court issued a limited search warrant for the HOA office and its financial records based on probable cause of fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of assets. By the time I stepped out onto the courthouse steps, Tom was already waiting with his phone in hand. "They executed the warrant 20 minutes ago," he said. "Karen was in the office. They walked her out in cuffs." For a moment, I didn't breathe. "Wait, what?" "Yeah," he said, grinning. "Sheriff's office got a fast-track judge to approve the warrant once your hearing got rolling. They found more forged documents, a set of burner phones, and a private file labeled contingency sales, quiet title routes. It's not just your cabin, it's a full scheme." I stared at him, not sure whether to laugh or cry. He handed me a printed photo, taken from one of the search team's phones. It showed Karen being led out of the HOA office, hands cuffed behind her back, eyes wide and mouth open mid-screech, somewhere between PTA mom and mafia boss getting caught at brunch. "You know what they charged her with?" Tom asked. "Not yet. Start with criminal trespass, add document forgery, fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate theft, and obstruction of justice. DA's office says they'll likely go federal once they loop in the IRS." I leaned against the courthouse railing, suddenly exhausted. It wasn't over, not yet. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't just on the defensive. The mask was off. The illusion of authority had cracked. Later that evening, I stood just outside the property line of my cabin, watching from a distance as the sheriff's department escorted the so-called tenant and his girlfriend out with garbage bags full of clothes. He looked confused, dazed. She looked pissed. I didn't wave, didn't speak, just watched them load up their SUV and drive off into the trees like tourists who'd overstayed their reservation. The porch light turned on automatically, casting a faint yellow glow over the welcome mat my father had carved years ago. Still there, worn but solid, not abandoned, not for sale, not theirs. The fallout was faster and louder than anyone expected. By the end of the week, the HOA's name was plastered across the local news like a dropped match in a dry canyon. Aspen Summit HOA president arrested in fraud probe. Property theft ring uncovered in Colorado mountains. Woolbridge scandal expands as prosecutors dig deeper. Even one of the national outlets picked it up. Something about the quiet war of homeowners against weaponized HOAs. Tom and Rachel were buried in paperwork, media calls, and coordination with the district attorney's office. As for me, I stayed quiet. I wasn't interested in giving interviews or posing for photos on my porch like a local celebrity. I was focused on rebuilding and watching the fire spread behind me. The county's audit team moved in on the HOA like bloodhounds on a scent trail. Over the next 10 days, they seized financial records, server backups, and internal memos. It wasn't just fraud. They found money laundering, falsified payroll reports, and dozens of consulting fees paid to shell companies registered in Nevada. The numbers were obscene. Nearly $700,000 in illegal revenue over 2 years, laundered through fake leases, emergency repairs, and legal retainer bloat. Even worse, HOA dues were still being collected from residents, many of whom had no idea what Karen and her board were doing behind closed doors. When the list of victims came out, it included people I'd never even met, an elderly widow who'd lost her storage barn to a code violation demolition, a single dad whose tool shed was annexed and reclassified as HOA utility property, a family whose entire garden was ripped out because it violated aesthetic continuity, and they had paid for it in fines, in silence, in fear. Rachel coordinated with a class action attorney to bundle claims from at least 9 households. I wasn't the only one pissed off anymore. This was a landslide of pissed off. Karen, meanwhile, was being held without bail. The court considered her a flight risk, especially after it came to light that she had quietly listed her home for sale under her maiden name 2 weeks prior. Prosecutors were preparing to file federal charges, especially once the IRS took interest in the undeclared income flowing through her restoration consulting company. It turned out she wasn't acting alone. 2 board members flipped the moment the cuffs came out. One of them, Greg Lunsford, HOA treasurer and part-time realtor, confessed to forging at least 4 abandonment filings himself. In exchange for immunity, he gave up everything: emails, financial spreadsheets, recordings. Karen had called it strategic urban renewal. Greg called it cover your ass documentation. The FBI called it organized property theft. And just like that, the Aspen Summit HOA collapsed. The county revoked its charter pending review. All accounts were frozen. The office was shuttered, its signage ripped down. By the time I returned to the building for a civil deposition, the once pristine reception desk had been cleared out, and someone had spray-painted "We're not your peasants" across the front window. Subtle. On the personal side, I was awarded temporary full possession of my cabin and surrounding land, with court protection pending the outcome of the civil trial. The county assessor issued a public correction to the abandonment designation and updated the official registry. It was mine again, on paper, in practice, and without dispute. Still, when I stepped inside for the first time in weeks, the silence hit like a punch to the ribs. The place was hollow. My father's hand-carved desk, gone. My bookshelves, stripped. The old wooden duck decoy that sat on the mantel for as long as I could remember, replaced by a tacky ceramic owl. But I didn't yell, didn't curse. I just walked from room to room and made a list. It wasn't the furniture that mattered. It was the principle, and I would rebuild it, piece by piece, with the same hands that built it in the first place. Later that night, I stood in the driveway with Tom, both of us holding beers, watching as the last of the tenants' belongings were loaded onto a flatbed. The guy wasn't charged. He'd cooperated fully, even returned the flat-screen TV that had been mounted to my living room wall. Said he thought the HOA was the landlord. "You ever think this whole thing's just a weird dream?" Tom asked. I took a sip. "Nope. In my dreams, I at least keep the decoy duck." We both laughed, briefly, quietly. Then the wind picked up, and the trees whispered the same way they always had. Only now, they were whispering to me again, not to strangers in stolen boots, walking through stolen doors. The courtroom was standing room only. By the time the civil trial against Aspen Summit HOA formally began, the gallery looked like the set of a courtroom drama. Reporters lined the back wall, HOA victims filled the pews like congregation at a Sunday reckoning, and Karen sat at the defense table in a charcoal suit, 2 sizes too tight, her mouth clamped in a hard line that hadn't moved in hours. The board members who hadn't been arrested had either resigned or vanished. Karen stood alone. Well, almost. Her new legal team wasn't from Duval and Kirkwood anymore. No, those rats had jumped ship the moment the fraud charges dropped. Now she had a discount pair from some litigation group that specialized in damage control for corporate landlords. They were pale, overworked, and underprepared. Meanwhile, Rachel was in her element. Tailored blazer, color-coded tabs in her binder, and an opening statement that left the room dead silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "this is not a case about negligence. This is about theft. This is about a private organization pretending to be a government, declaring property abandoned without due process, and using forged documents to justify financial exploitation. My client didn't just lose access to his home. He was erased, systematically and deliberately, by people who believed they could hide behind procedure. Today, we show them they can't." The first week was a bloodbath. Rachel walked the jury through a timeline of HOA fraud like a historian laying out a war. Property maps altered without consent, fake leases generated with matching signature patterns, correspondence between Karen and the notary, who'd since fled the state, even a recorded phone call where Karen referred to my cabin as the next easy one if the architect doesn't show up again this winter. I watched the jury flinch. Our expert witnesses came next, property law specialists, document analysts, and forensic accountants. One by one, they established the pattern, a financial incentive to seize underutilized land, falsify abandonment, install compliant renters, and sell or repurpose the property for profit. It wasn't just theft, it was strategy. Karen's team, they tried to spin it, claimed the board had interpreted ambiguous policy language in good faith. Claimed no harm was done because the properties were improved during interim stewardship. Claimed I had failed to adequately maintain visibility at the cabin and had not registered regular presence. Rachel eviscerated them. "You're telling this court that because my client didn't throw a barbecue every weekend, he forfeited his rights to legal ownership? Objection. Overruled." The final nail came from Greg Lunsford, the former treasurer turned state's witness. Calm, remorseful, and frighteningly honest, he laid out the entire scheme, how Karen identified targets based on tax rolls and Google Earth images, how she tracked travel schedules of second home owners, how she bragged about low-conflict transitions in staff meetings, meaning the ones that didn't make the news. She said Browning was a soft target, Greg said under oath. called him a recluse with too much land and no local friends. Said no one would care if we repurposed it. I looked straight at Karen as he said it. She didn't return my gaze. After 2.5 weeks, the jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict: guilty on all counts: civil liability, negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraudulent conveyance. Damages were awarded in full. I got back the full market value of everything stolen and destroyed, plus punitive damages. But that wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was what the judge said during sentencing. This court finds that Aspen Summit HOA operated beyond the limits of any reasonable authority granted to them. Their actions were not governance. They were coercion. As such, I am ordering not only restitution but full dissolution of the association, effective immediately. Its assets will be liquidated to repay victims. A court-appointed receiver will oversee the process, and no individual involved may hold administrative office in any HOA for 10 years. A sound rippled through the gallery. Someone wept. Another person clapped once before being shushed by a bailiff. Karen sat stone still, hands gripping the edge of the defense table. When the judge dismissed the room, I stood slowly and walked toward the exit. On my way out, I passed Karen being led away for her criminal hearing. For the briefest moment, our eyes met. She looked like a woman who had finally realized the rules weren't hers to rewrite. The snow had just started to fall again when I returned to the cabin. A thin powder dusted the roof, clung to the windowsills, softened the worn gravel path leading from the gate to the front porch. The house looked still, almost shy, like it wasn't sure if it was really mine again or just another bureaucratic hallucination waiting to collapse. But when I stepped through the front door and inhaled the dry pine and old wood, I knew it was real. I was home. The place was gutted, sure. No furniture, no curtains, no books, no duck decoy. The walls were stripped bare, like a crime scene scrubbed clean of its soul. But beneath all that emptiness, the bones were still good. My father's hardwood floors creaked the same way they always had. The wood stove still hummed when I lit it. The porch still groaned when I leaned on the railing and looked out at the snow-covered ridge. I had the land back, not just in a legal sense, but in spirit, and I had no intention of letting it fall into silence again. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into repairs. I replaced the windows the tenants had scratched up. I rewired the porch lights. I ordered lumber for new shelving, dragged in a second-hand leather armchair from a place in town, and started restocking the pantry shelf by shelf. I even found a guy who specialized in reclaiming stolen property from eviction auctions. Thanks to him, I recovered my father's carved desk. It had been sitting in a warehouse 40 minutes down the highway, gathering dust under a label that read, "Undisclosed Owner, HOA Reclaim." Figures. I installed a new camera system too, 8 outdoor motion units, 2 indoors, all streaming directly to a secured server. I don't trust easy anymore. Not with papers, not with people, not with associations who speak in bylaws but act like gangsters. On the 3rd Sunday after the verdict, I got a visitor. It was Tom, my favorite grumpy detective, holding a thermos of coffee and looking as if he'd rather be anywhere else. He didn't say much at first, just handed me a yellow envelope and nodded toward the new sign I'd mounted to the front gate. Private property. Abandon your ambitions. Not this lot. He snorted. That'll piss off the next Karen. Good, I said. They can scream at the cameras. We drank our coffee in silence, sitting on the porch like 2 men waiting out a storm that had already passed. Tom told me the county had auctioned off the old HOA office. Some development firm bought it, and rumor had it they were turning it into a community dog park. I couldn't help but laugh. Karen, meanwhile, had been sentenced to 12 years with possibility of parole after 8. Her appeal was denied. Last anyone heard, she'd been moved to a medium-security facility in Pueblo, where she was reportedly already organizing the commissary schedule. Of course she was. The victims from the HOA were doing better. The McKinleys had their home restored. Others received settlements, and some joined together to start a new neighborhood committee, one built on transparency, voluntary participation, and zero power to seize so much as a mailbox. They even invited me to their first meeting. I didn't go. Not because I was bitter, but because I didn't need a committee to tell me how to be a good neighbor, and they didn't need me to remind them how bad things could get when power goes unchecked. Sometimes the best thing you can build in a community is a fence. It's been 2 months now. The place is coming back together. I've got my drafting table set up again. I've been sketching a new guest cabin, not for rent, just for peace. A fire pit out back, maybe a hot tub if I'm feeling foolish. Some mornings I wake up before sunrise just to sit on the porch and feel the quiet hum of something that's finally mine again. I don't know if I believe in justice in the cosmic sense, but I believe in paper trails, persistence, and making damn sure the next smug HOA president thinks twice before hammering a fake seizure notice into someone else's gate. This land was never abandoned. It was waiting.